usually in the back.
Yes, but not everybody does.
Well, it doesn't have a lot of them.
Okay, we got 10 lines on the bottom of the page. Omer of Chomo. What
number on the page?
73b.
Okay.
10 lines on the bottom of the page. Omer of Chomo. So we have an interesting story. Omer of Chomo. Okay, so basically, a buyer hired an agent to go buy him wine. Now, this wine would have been purchased in Tishrei time when the wine is made, so it would have been much cheaper. And the guy went ahead and was lazy. He didn't do anything, so he lost the buyer now loses out on the cheap price. The law is mishamlek ka'ozel a parvosa dizul shafet. He has to pay him the difference in price between the current rate and the market.
I think it was.
Yeah, the port is all shafets. And that's sort of where there was the best market.
Yeah.
The best market, best way to sell wine in the market. So the difference in that price and the current price is what the buyer has to pay for his laziness. Now,
Is the rabbi there?
Looks like we lost him.
okay. So if
Looks like he's back.
yeah, I'm back. Okay. If the guy said yayin stam, meaning he said just buy me wine, so then presumably somebody would have sold him wine. But if you told him to buy wine from a specific seller, so that would not work, because who said the seller would have the wine or would be interested in selling it? And in that case, you can't really blame. It's very hard to pin the blame on the buyer for being lazy. It could very well be that even had he not been lazy, the seller would not have what to sell him. Rav Ashi says it doesn't make a difference. The buyer here does not pay anything for his laziness. My timer, it's asmachta hiva asmachta loikanya. What's an asmachta again? You need the glossary. What's an asmachta? Asmachta is a de. What does a de mean? What if?
Yeah, it depends on something. If this happened, an event is contingent on something prior occurring.
It's an if that's never supposed to happen.
Oh.
No, that nobody anticipates. That nobody anticipates happening. So and okay, so therefore you don't have to pay the guy anything. What's different than this Mishnah? So here's an interesting scenario. You hire a sharecropper to plant your field. So now the problem with the sharecropper is that sharecropper could decide not to plant. So typically the rule is if a sharecropper decides not to plant, he pays sort of a median difference. In other words, you evaluate the field as if it would have grown a median-sized crop, not as good as everybody else, but also not terribly poor. And then they split that amount 50-50. Whatever the sharecropper is supposed to take, he deducts his percentage, and then he owes that to the original owner, to the guy giving him the field. However, let's say they specifically make a condition that if he lets the field lie fallow, then he has to pay as if the field would have yielded a quality crop. So now that's what he has to pay.
You guess wrong. He guessed wrong. He miscalculated.
Yeah. So Shalom, he has to pay the best. Exactly what the agreement was. Now, why isn't that in a smach list? The Gemara says Hasan biyadei hachala biyadei. There's a fundamental difference. The sharecropper could. The fact that he doesn't plant the field is within his power. However, to convince somebody to sell something to you is not within your power. So therefore, you can't really blame the messenger for not being able to purchase wine because it isn't necessarily up to him. So Amarova, Hani Beitilsa the Yov Zuz Lachad, Lamizim Lumidi. So three people pool together their money to buy something. So the
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
hang on, I'm gonna log in by phone here.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press pound to continue. You are in the meeting now. There are 2 participants in the meeting. This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes,
Excellent.
yes,
Okay.
indeed. Finally.
The video falls down, then we'll still have the phone. Okay. Where were we?
Omer.
Okay, so in a town where this tatumta was the norm, then that's considered a valid opinion. Now obviously this is some sort of archaic way of transferring wine. Why it's so important today? Because the concept of this Gemara is that if there is a minig seifrim, if there is a custom among the merchants, how they finalize a deal. Like today it's click here on the terms and conditions and then place order. And that's the moment we are sort of, you agree not to change your mind. It's considered an actual opinion.
I think this is still not, I'm not done. Will you buy something and leave it with the,
Yeah,
leave
it
it
is.
with the sellers or?
And there's in the back in the day when Amsterdam used to have, not Amsterdam, Brussels used to have the Borsa.
Yeah.
Big diamond exchange. There was the custom, and there was so many Jews that worked there. But the custom was that if you gave the guy the blessing of bracha v'hatzlacha, and that was the handshake. And even the non-Jews would give out this blessing. Okay. If he was the first of those cutting. Okay. So we pointed out that it has to be yeshla in order to make a condition. And now we get to a very, very crucial debate here. Meaning, if you want to sell a future, meaning deliver it later and accept money now, then there must be either there's a market, the market's already set, or you already have some of that grain around. If it's missing 2 cents of it, so then you're allowed to. That's however, but it's missing 3 actions. There are 3 actions necessary to prepare. We'll explain in a moment. To prepare it to be sold, then you cannot sell it. Shmuel says, if those actions are up to man, even 100 action steps that are missing, or yet yeshla, you have it. Why? Because you could always finish it, because it's all up to you. However, if it's b'dei shemayim, it's things that take time, it's not up to you. Even 1 step prevents you from arguing with yeshla. You can't sell it. Now we learn he can agree to a price on the grain. Gemara says it's missing the action of putting it in the sun to get it to dry out. And for it to be fresh, midraw and winnowed. Gemara says it was already in the sun and it was already dried out. It's only 2 steps. It's threshing and winnowing. According to Shmuel, how can you winnow? Winnow is not up to you. You need to wait for a windy day. There was a special vessel they would use, sort of would trap the grain, but it would allow the stalks to fly away. They were able to winnow without much wind. Bird or something. Okay. So now basically, now that we have this fundamental debate, again, according to Rav, it's 3 steps versus 2 steps. According to Shmuel, it's a step that sort of is not up to you. It's time. We call b'dei shemayim. It's up to heaven. Or it's a step that it could be done by men. Could be done by men. Then as many steps as necessary. It's all considered yeshli. So now we're going to each category and we're going to try to analyze how many steps are necessary to bring this to market. Well, we have a large basket of grapes. Gemara says, mechamer. Which one's the mechamer? It has to be warmed up or something.
Vat of grapes possess a future wine is lacking for processing.
Yeah, what's the first of 4 processes?
Ripening.
Okay, so the first one, mechamer. Okay, so mechamer was slowly. So mechamer is ripening. That's the way they would heat. It would heat up the grapes. They keep them in a warm place to fully ripen them. Second is the yulei bavametzia. I believe that means to go into the press. Lameidash, to press it. Ulaminget, and to carry the wine from the press into the barrels or into some sort of pit to hold it. So the Gemara says, "The Tani Rafia al Kamma Seisim, Achanami al Kamma Anovim." We're talking about where it's already ripened, just like Rafia taught on with regard to the olives. So we'll say the same thing is true with regard to the grapes. They're already ripened. The Gemara says, "They're still missing 3 actions: pressing. Putting it into the press, pressing, and carrying the wine away." Gemara says, a town where the guy who purchases the grapes, his responsibility to carry the wine, the grapes, from the press to the barrel. Okay, on a large vessel full of olives. Same thing, they're missing this heat process where the process is heated up to be fully ripened. The iyula lebeidofi, and being brought to an olive press, lemeidash to be pressed, ulaminged, and to carry away the oil. We're talking about the olives that were already fully ripe. There's still three actions. Who minged. The guy who buys it, it's his responsibility to carry the oil from the press to the long-term storage. We said it's like I don't know what it's called in English, it's like the dough sort of stuff, that the potter is like this raw pottery stuff used to fashion the vessels. So clay balls. And the idea here is that these what's happening is you have the balls of clay and you're selling pottery. It's quite a distance there, right? So is missing a few things. Okay, the fufi understands forming a vessel. The yevushe is to dry it. Iyula atuna, let it be, putting it into the kiln. Lemitzraf, to be fired in the kiln. Ulamepak, I believe this means to remove it from the kiln. The Gemara says it's a lot of different steps. The Gemara says it's already formed into a vessel and it's sort of dried. It's ready to go into a kiln. So the ikatlas is still three things. It has to be put into the kiln, it has to be fired in the kiln, and it has to be removed from the kiln. The purchaser is the one who removes it from the kiln. Now, I'm no expert in pottery here, but from what I understand, it's not so easy to remove from the kiln. It has to be removed slowly. If you take it out too quickly, it will break. You have to take it out slowly. I think I might be wrong about that. I'm not sure. Okay. V'al hasid, and on plaster, mishayish anu bekivshon, what's put into the kiln. Gemara says v'amchutzer mikla ba'afuke. Okay, what's mikla?
Burning.
Mikla, okay, that's the firing. Ba'afuke is to take it out, and umeidak, what's that?
Crumbling.
It's a crumble it. Okay, you have to fire it, take it out, and crumble it into this paste that will be used as plaster. Gemara says, "Va'asr in the town, the guy who buys it, he's the one who's responsible for crumbling it. There's only two steps. According to Shmuel, that says even 100 steps, as long as they're up to man, they don't take time, then they're all called yeshlai. Why does he actually have to put it into the kiln? Right? Because putting it into the kiln is a step of man. Gemara says, you're right. And when it becomes fit to be put into the fire, you don't have to into the kiln. You don't have to actually put into the kiln for exactly that reason. Because according to Shmuel, once it's fit to put into the kiln, it says if you put it in, put it in. It has the same law. It's considered yeshlai, and you're able to charge for pure plaster, even though you have some sort of raw, earthy material. Okay, and that concludes the debate here between Rav and Shmuel, whether you need 3 steps versus 2 steps versus 3 steps, or as many steps as up to man versus even 1 step that's up to God. It takes time, and it depends on the weather, etc. Okay, going back to this pottery bowls, these clay bowls. Until you have them actually made into bowls. That's the opinion of Rameir. Rabbi says when it is true, but offer lovan. If the base of the pottery is a type of white sand, apparently is not so common. I will offer shocher, but sort of a black mud, black sand could go in Kfar Chananya, like the sand that's found in Kfar Chananya and its neighbors, this clay brick, clay mud type of material. Farsichen with the town of Farsichen and its neighbors. Because in these towns, this type of clay was raw clay was so common. So even if you don't have it, basically anybody has it. You can always easily get it. So it's just like an established market. Just like we said, if the market was established, you don't actually have to write a feature. So to here, you don't need to because everyone has it. Amemer Yov Zuzim Mechimi Aili Afra. Amemer was willing to pay meaning purchase future pottery once the potter had the clay already assembled, piled up in his house. According to Meir, the pottery actually has to be made. According to Rabbi Yossi says you don't even have to have the raw clay in your house, the raw muds, because according to Rabbi Yossi, even if you don't have it, somebody else will have it. But there was much. I'm sorry, 1 second. We're going like Rabbi Yossi. This raw clay material, mud and sand, whatever it was, to make the clay was very rare. It's very expensive. If the guy already has the raw materials of some chadaite, then the buyer is convinced that the transaction is authentic because the guy has the supplies necessary to prepare the stuff. But if he doesn't have the raw material, so the buyer is not convinced that he'll actually get the raw material easily, and therefore he does not have confidence the transaction will go through, and therefore the transaction doesn't go through. Okay, you can purchase fertilizer entire. Okay, so if you go back to the Mishnah, you'll see there's 3 opinions. The first opinion says you can buy fertilizer a whole year. The second opinion says, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, that says you can only purchase it if you have fertilizer in the in your fields. And the third opinion says it's permitted. Now, the third opinion seems to be the same as the first unnamed opinion. The third opinion is the rabbis. Again, the first opinion says you can sell fertilizer a whole year. Rabbi Yossi says no, only if you have it. And the rabbis say it's permitted. Sounds like the rabbis and the first opinion, the unnamed opinion, are saying exactly the same thing. Rav explains, difference is as follows. According to Rabbi Yossi, you must have the fertilizer in your possession. According to the rabbis, summertime, where I guess the animals eat more and they produce more manure, you can sell fertilizer even if you don't have any. And according to the first opinion, you can do this even during the winter season, where I guess the animals eat less or something, or it's maybe less useful. So therefore, the Tanakam, the first unnamed opinion, is the most lenient. Okay, the Mishnah says you're allowed to insert a clause in the contract, whereas if the price decreases, then your arrangement decreases as well. You have 2 options. You can sign a contract at the current price; it's fixed, it won't change, or you can sign a price that if the price decreases in value, Sharak Vaya means that more quantity is available for the same price. Then there's a decrease in price, and you're allowed to decrease. The buyer will get more grain with such an arrangement. Now we got to an interesting story. There was a father-in-law who hires his son-in-law to purchase his own nadin, his own dowry. So what was the dowry? All the types of stuff you might think that a father-in-law would give to his daughter and son-in-law. Jewelry and clothing, probably some dishes or something, basic stuff that they needed for the house. He promised them a lot of money. The guy went out to a bunch of merchants and he set prices. When we get married, we want to be able to get this amount of dishes, this amount of gold, and that amount of clothing. Sure enough, what happened? The prices there was a bad deal. Basically, the guy bought the stuff at a very expensive price, and now everything decreased in value. So his $10,000 dowry is now worth, $5,000, and he's not happy. Also, came to the Republic. So they went to Republic. If you agree to such a relationship, like we specified in the Mishnah, that should the price go down, you can change the price. So then, if the price goes down, you get more money now for your $10,000. But if you didn't insert that clause, you have to take like the original value, and you've lost half your dowry. So the rabbi said to Papa, the Eli Pasuk, if this was not specified, that should the prices go down, then I get more for my money. I get the original value. This is the kinyan of money. And money is not a kinyan. You pointed out.
All right.
Kesef is not a kinyan. You need to do Mashiach. There's no Mashiach that was done. So Mashiach is pulling it. Or Hagbah lifting it. Physically taking possession of it. So Omer Lahu, so Rav Papa said to them, you're right. I know now I'm in the Kabuli ala Mishapara. I only meant to the curse of Mishapara. Just to review quickly, what is Mishapara? Mishapara is the God that punished the generation of the floods and the generation of the dispersion. Mm-hmm. He will punish anybody who basically violates such an agreement. Pretty stiff curse. I know not Mikabula Mishapara. I basically said to him, not that I was technically speaking, he could undo the sale, but if he does, he gets that curse. Okay, if they agree to a relationship where the price will drop accordingly, and the seller changes his mind, the seller gets the curse of the Mishapara. The Eli Pasuk Lekach Kahadebe. 1 second. Eli Pasuk Eli Pasuk, if there was no specified arrangement that should the price decrease, then accordingly the sale would decrease as well. And the buyer, in this case the groom, decides to change his mind, so the groom gets the curse of the Mishapara. Okay. So, okay. Ravina Rav Papa. So Ravina says Rav Papa as follows. Rav Papa here basically is interpreting the Mishnah as the halacha. Papa here is making a straight interpretation from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says you could specify such an agreement, and Rav Papa basically says, okay, well, it depends if you specified. Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this is all based on a presumption. This is the critical thing for the next Gemara. We said that kesef isn't a kinyan, and you can change your mind. However, there's a major catch that we learned in Hazaf. There's a major debate between the rabbis and Reb Shimon. Again, the rabbi said if you do kesef, right, then no kinyan. You can change your mind. You get a curse in Mishapara, but you're allowed to change your mind. Technically speaking, you can change your mind. Who could change their minds? Either the buyer, according to the rabbis, either the buyer or the seller, either one. However, according to Reb Shimon, it's only the seller and not the buyer. The buyer cannot change his mind. Let's explain as follows now. So, a little complicated. You're presuming that our Mishnah is the opinions of just the way we explained the Mishnah until now and applied it to Rav Papa's statements was that the Mishnah is going according to the rabbi's opinion. Both the seller and the buyer can undo it. And therefore, if they specify that the contract could be adjusted, will be adjusted, then whoever changes, then the seller potentially would get the curse of Mishapara. If they didn't make the specification, the buyer would get the Mishapara. That's understanding that the Mishnah is going according to the opinion of the rabbis. Exactly as we explained. Dilma, perhaps the Mishnah is Reb Shimon. The Amar Mois Kainet. Shimon says that if the buyer gave money, the buyer cannot change his mind. And therefore, according to Reb Shimon, if the buyer made an agreement without the specification, if the price changes, then of course the price is valid based on the original price. And the seller makes off and the buyer is not allowed to change his mind. Except that if they did make the specification and the buyer gets the lower price. That makes sense. However, according to the rabbis, it could be according to the rabbis because only money was transacted. So therefore, it could be that intrinsically there's always an agreement that if the price gets adjusted, then the future contract gets adjusted downward as well. Maybe you don't need to specify that. It's an inherent understanding. I'm giving you the current price because that's what I think is the cheapest price. But if it gets cheaper, fair enough. Okay. So Amrlay, Ravina responds to Ravina. Amar the Amr of Shimon b'chad taro, trei taro mi Amr. It's clear that Rav Shimon never made his statements when there were two sets of values, two market values. Rav Shimon spoke about the buyer being able to change his mind, the buyer not being able to change his mind. The rabbis only gave this ability to the seller, not to the buyer. This was only when we're talking about the same market value. But if the market value changed in between, then Rav Shimon would agree that both of them could change their mind. In effect, Rav Shimon is the same opinion as the rabbis. So there is no difference. Because we're talking about two separate, in other words, the Mishnah talks about two separate values, two separate market prices. There's the market rate of 5 units per dollar. There's the later market rate of 10 units per dollar. And both the rabbis and Rav Shimon agree in that circumstance. In that circumstance, both the buyer and the seller could undo the sale if Kesef was not transacted. I'm sorry, if only Kesef was given. Only Kesef was given. This that Rav Shimon disagrees with the rabbis and says that the buyer cannot change his mind if he gave money is when the price is equal. And I'm going to prove that to you. Why? Because if you're not going to say that, it would never be possible to have a mishapara with the buyer. In other words, according to Shimon, the buyer is always locked up. How is it ever possible that the buyer would get the curse of mishapara? And well, who says the buyer does get the curse of mishapara? The Mishnah. You say, well, maybe the buyer. You're right. There is never a scenario where the buyer gets the mishapara. Mishnah ends off that mikol means like in all circumstances, everybody agrees. It's a mishapara. What does that mean? It's clear in the Mishnah that everybody agrees that it is possible for the buyer to get a curse of mishapara. How is this possible? According to Shimon, if the buyer gives money, he cannot change his mind. So it should be impossible for him to get mishapara. He's locked up. He signed a contract. It's too bad for him. So how is it ever possible for the buyer to get a mishapara? It must be that there is a circumstance where the buyer could change his mind. And what's that circumstance? Where the price was changed. Originally it was 5 units for $1, now it's 10 units for $1. The buyer wants to change his mind. So even though normally Rav Shimon says the buyer, once he gives money, can't change his mind, but that's where the price is the same, and he just wants to renege on the sale. But where the price changes, then Rav Shimon does allow him to change his mind and get the curse of the mishapara. Okay.
It's hard to get.
Alakika Amr of Shimon b'chad tara, b'trei tari with two separate values. Loy Amr. He didn't say it. Amr l'Ravacha b'rei d'Rava l'Ravashi. Ravacha, the son of Rava, says Ravashi, but typically the shliach shavi nikara. You have another point here. The point is that it would seem that the father-in-law appointed his groom as messenger. And there's a general principle here, which is that if you appoint a messenger, let's say, it's a nice way of saying that you're here to do good stuff for me and not to do bad stuff for me. And if you do bad stuff for me, well, you don't represent me in that. And basically, the father-in-law tells the groom, I sent you to do a good deal, and you made a terrible deal. You don't represent me. If that's the case, there's no mishapara here because you never were authorized to engage in such a deal. So basically, he can undo the whole thing because it turns out that his appointment as messenger, he didn't represent his father-in-law because he messed his father-in-law over. Gemara says, we're talking about a scenario here where the son-in-law is not a messenger. He's a merchant. He's a broker. He's sort of really deals. He buys and sells. He wasn't acting on his father-in-law's behalf. He was acting on his own behalf. And therefore, if he changes the deal on the dowry, then he gets the curse of the mishapara.
The whole thing around.
Yeah. Well, no, he's sort of his father-in-law did give him the money.
Yeah.
But it didn't formalize an agent type of relationship. It's much more of you're skilled in the business, so you go buy whatever you want to buy. But the relationship is here directly between the groom and the suppliers and the stores. Not as the groom is not representing his father.
So basically, the dowry was a bunch of dollars, a bunch of money rather than
Correct. Rather than what he thought he was going to get. I would say he actually got what he was going to get, but he could have gotten more had he been a little more savvy. Okay. Have a great day.